is still evolving. New Viascan technology is being introduced, which will estimate carcass yield more accurately and lead to better rewards for producers of higher yielding carcasses.
In terms of our assessments for carcass quality, there are a number of quality standards used in that assessment. In Australia we use the Osmeat system. There are two colour chip standards for meat colour and fat colour. Generally speaking, the markets require a light bright red meat colour and prefer a whiter coloured fat colour. Here we've got a pH meter which simply measures alkalinity or acidity of meat. And in terms of marbling chips, we have a number of standards going from a 0 through to a 6 chip, 6 being the highest. Commonly the domestic product in Australia is down at the lower end with 0 to 2 marbling. Age is recorded in terms of dentition on the slaughter floor. There's also another way we can assess the age or maturity of a beef carcass, and that is through ossification or bone maturity. Fat is assessed at the seam fat site above the eye muscle on the inside of the carcass, and you can see that it closely approximates the 0 chip. For assessment of fat colour, we don't go to the next colour range until that colour shows more yellow pigmentation. Alternatively, customers may also require an assessment of the external fat on the carcass, which in some cases may be slightly more yellow. Assessment of meat colour is carried out against the standards. Standards are used with a chiller torch up against the muscle colour at the eye muscle. In this case, we're approximating that the muscle colour is a 1B chip. We wouldn't move to a darker chip until we see more pigmentation or darker colour in that ribeye. The market requires product which is in that lighter end of the scale, from 1A through to 3. The darker end of the scale is normally associated with poor quality and poor consumer appeal, and generally comes from animals being stressed by the slaughter. Here we've got an example of a beef carcass which is a dark cutter. It's a meat colour chip 3, and it's also got an associated high pH, a reading of 5.9. Both those issues combine to produce a product which is both unappealing to the customer at the retail level, but also it's been shown from consumer testing that that high pH meat will also eat tougher. There is a disadvantage with packing this meat in terms of its storage life, and it does not store as long as lower pH meat. In more recent times we've had more objective ways of measuring beef carcasses. Here we've got an example of a pH meter which measures acidity and alkalinity of meat. That's inserted into the eye muscle and gives us a measure of the palatability of that meat, but also gives us an idea of the stress that may have occurred in the animal prior to slaughter. In terms of the pH measurement on this particular carcass, we've got a measure around about 5.6. This is in the ideal range, which we're looking for being from 5.3 to 5.7. Typically, if this was a stressed animal, we might see pHs in the much higher range, exceeding 6. So in terms of palatability, this is indicating a very acceptable product. In terms of the assessment for marbling, we're looking at the distribution of fat within the red lean tissue of the eye muscle. This distribution of white fat must equate to the chip we're looking at. In this case, we've got a 1 chip standard, and we wouldn't move to a 2 chip until we see more significant levels of fat.
When grading for Meat Standards Australia, we give 2 different marbling scores. One is the Osmeat marbling score and one is the US marbling score. The main difference between both scores is the fact that Osmeat score is worked out on the amount of marbling in the eye muscle, whereas the US system is worked out on how that marbling is distributed and how fine the marbling is within the eye muscle. The reason we give 2 scores is because we know if the marbling is all in one clump or one area of the eye muscle, that it won't eat as good as if it's distributed through the eye muscle evenly.
As we're aware, we can assess the age of an animal in terms of its dentition, but there's another method in terms of assessing the age or maturity of a beef carcass, and that is using ossification or bone maturity. That's been shown to have a higher correlation with the eating quality of the animal, and it's assessed in a number of different ways. The bone maturity of this particular carcass is fairly youthful or young in its age because of the roundness and blood-filled nature of the inside of the rib cage. In terms of ossification score though, we look at the method by which cartilage or young tissue turns to bone. In this example I'm pointing to the sacral vertebrae region or the tail end of the animal, which is the first to initiate ossification. Generally as an animal ages, though, that formation of bone from cartilage progresses down through the lumbar into the thoracic vertebrae and in towards the head region. This particular example on the sacral vertebrae shows a dark red coloration or capping over one of the sacral vertebrae. This particular carcass would have a low ossification score, which is indicative of a young animal. In terms of meat quality, we've got an example of a better marble carcass. It comes up to an Osmeat standard 2. In terms of palatability, consumer testing tells us that this carcass should eat slightly better than the zero chip that we showed earlier.
Overall, this is a very good carcass from the point of view of yield. It's showing all that muscling and a nice even covering of fat. Its weakness is that it really has not quite adequate fat in a few areas, but it has excellent meat quality. The eye muscle shows very bright pink colour and a fine texture, and I'm sure the eating quality would be excellent. From the producer's point of view, the way to improve this carcass would have been to carry it on just a little more to improve the fat cover, so a little more feed for a little longer time. This carcass isn't quite so heavy in the muscling, it's only just above average, but it's a very good, well finished carcass. It's got a nice even fat covering all through, and certainly it's brought out the maximum in the meat quality. The colour and texture of that meat and a little bit of marbling would be very good from an eating quality point of view. So the producer's done the best job he possibly could with this carcass. This carcass will have a fairly low yield of saleable meat. As you can see, it's got a very thick fat cover right down the back and down the ribs, and it would take quite a lot of trimming to get those cuts acceptable for today's consumer, meaning a low saleable yield. This carcass has a problem in that it's too fat. There's nothing wrong with the meat quality, it's been very well fed, and from the quality point of view, the eating quality will be excellent, but the over-fatness has led to a low saleable meat yield, and to improve this carcass, it probably should have been sold a little earlier. Now, from a genetic improvement point of view, rather than sell a lighter weight carcass, the other option is to work on the genetics to improve the muscling and improve that saleable meat yield. Australia supplies beef to a wide range of markets, and they fit into several main market categories. The carcasses each market requires are usually described using age by dentition, sex, weight and fat depth at the P8 site, followed by their specific quality requirements. Many of our premium markets have additional specific requirements such as licensing, accreditation, minimum days on feed, and of course the accompanying paperwork. The actual merit of a carcass is a combination of yield and quality, with a greater emphasis on quality, especially marbling, in the high-quality, grain-fed export markets. High yield comes from heavy muscling and a thin, even fat cover, while ideal meat quality is indicated mainly by pH in the optimum range, pinkish red meat colour, and the amount of marbling required by the market. The process of carcass evaluation will keep changing as markets develop and as our scientific knowledge, technology and practical experience grow. The important thing is to understand enough about carcass specifications so you can keep your cattle tuned to the needs of the market.